Are those the same microphones you bought when we first started doing the podcast?
Yeah, they're the ones that I use for all my shit.
The whole thing that started it all. The thing that also got. I mean, I don't know. You can cut this out. But,
can you try to talk again, Victor?
Check. Mic check.
It's the thing that started it all. The thing that got.
The thing that started it all. We are on podcast 69. Pill Pod.
Is it 69, really?
69 is interesting because it's like if you put the number upside down, then you have a 6 and a 9. So that's why it's an interesting number that we got. Pill Pod 69. Promise the last time that we ever bring up daddy.
Is it really the last time? I can't.
Yeah, I don't know if we should make a promise.
Promises are made to be broken.
We're making an effort. Okay, so we're live. If you're watching this on YouTube, then we're live. This, Lit Vic, in the flesh.
Yo.
The other Vic.
Politics Victor. Politics
guy.
The OG Vic.
Matt McManus.
What's up?
You know him. And myself, Pills.
Believe it or not, we used to do this. We started off doing it in person. And then obviously the pandemic hit, but this is probably the first time we've done it in person since before the pandemic, right?
This is actually the first time I've ever done a full one of these.
Right, because
we did one together that one time.
Oh
at
yeah,
my place.
which we didn't even get to release because of the shitty audio. That was such a
that's
good
right,
interview
yeah.
too.
It was
too
a good
bad.
interview. Yeah, so this is my first time doing a live one ever. It's awesome.
It's cool.
Anyway, you're going to miss Daddy after today because I'm vowing never to speak of him again. He left U of T, so I don't know. He's not an academic anymore. Now he's just a public intellectual.
I heard one of my professors, I think, tweeting about how he's so happy that no longer does he have to say, because I go to University of Toronto, that my colleague or someone can refer, oh, he's your colleague.
Yeah, I'd also like to say, Pills, that they promised that like A Nightmare on Elm Street would end with 7 movies. And we've had many Freddy Krueger adventures since then. So let's not jump the gun.
But it is fitting that we're talking about Lobster Daddy in our first in-person pod.
It should be mentioned too that Eric is in here. Maybe you mentioned it and I didn't notice.
Oh yeah, Eric's got the cove. So
does he actually? Is it confirmed?
No, they're not allowed to test him, but it's sore throat and nasal stuff. So
oh yeah, it's the
Eric. I'm sorry you're not here. We love you.
Alma COVID.
You can see that it's Friday night, so we got some drinks. We kind of stopped drinking on the pod. I think it's when we stopped recording on Friday nights.
Yeah, whenever when we first started doing it before Matt's time, we would always drink because it would be an in-person thing, and we always did it like as a hangout excuse. But then COVID hit, and I don't know. At least for me, I remember you guys were drinking still. Eric was drinking on the pod even when it was over Zoom. Pills, I feel like you were drinking. You probably drink. I have this weird thing where I don't really like drinking when I'm not physically with other people. I don't know why that is. I've tried to even be like, oh, I'm home from a busy day at work. Like, let me have a drink. And I just don't like the way it makes me feel. It's like my brain turns off in a way that I want to be around other people.
This is why you need Jordan Peterson's advice.
Yeah, and I don't like it.
You should stand up straight with your shoulders back and suck back some wine.
Victor, it's your dirty room yelling at you. That's really what's going on there. You gotta just set your house in order and you'll be fine.
Actually, Victor's house is extremely clean for a bachelor dude. You know.
Do you want to know? I'm not technically a bachelor, but yes, I live alone.
I think I had to throw that in there. Like, no, I'm not a bachelor. Fuck off.
Well, I mean, I'm just saying.
I'm no beta cook.
You know what's funny though? Speaking of like clean rooms, I would say that the only thing that I don't actually do regularly that is like a normal stereotypical clean thing is I don't actually make my bed.
Really?
I don't care. It's like the one thing I get up and it's like there's no point, and it drives my girlfriend fucking crazy because she's like it's like the first thing she does every time. So I always like make my bed, but it's the only thing. I mean, my room's clean. Like I'm everything is clean. It's just I just leave the bed. I just leave the blanket like shuffled around. I just don't care about like, well, I'm gonna get back in it anyway. I don't know.
Yeah, you kind of break with the grad school cliche because I've been to your place a couple times and it is always immaculate, like very, very nice. Like if I wasn't married, then my state of being would decay pretty rapidly. Unlike some people I know, it never reaches like a complete minimal threshold, but it definitely can reach a pretty low threshold. So
I definitely believe you.
Yeah, well, you've seen it.
Pills, are you when you were a bachelor? Were you clean?
Look at this place. This place is beautiful. There's even plants.
What do you mean? You're not. This is not you. This is. I don't know if this is you.
All right, let's get to
I can say from when he was living.
Let's get to the content. Thank you, Matt. All right, so you might see a few cuts here. We're going to try to run through it. We have a bunch of clips.
I can already tell which one was going to be the first cut.
Of the infamous
address,
Joe Rogan interview with Daddy, where Daddy, I don't know, I think completely discredited himself as an intellectual. I mean, that's my opinion. And then the kids in the chat are going to say, you haven't read all of his books. But Matt actually has read all of his books.
Did you watch? So did you watch the David Pakman thing I sent you then?
No.
Okay, because that's exactly what David Pakman says in his clip. He literally says like, he's like, I'm going to be careful with what I say. I think he described the interview as he was like bizarre interview that seems like a skit is like the name of the description. And he says like, he's like, no matter what I'm going to say, people in the chat are going to say, well, you're just saying that because you haven't actually read his books and you don't understand.
Can I just say
the genius of what he's saying?
Having read all his books.
Yeah, you actually have a right to.
I actually kind of enjoyed Maps of Meaning, and I pointed this out in our text. Like, I think it has insights here and there, and it's an enjoyable read and all that stuff. It does actually make me kind of depressed because he has started to approach self-parody, like to a threshold that we really, really tried to avoid when we were writing about him. We were like, we're going to take him straight as a serious intellectual. Now it's just really hard to do that because what the fuck do you even say when somebody's like, climate is everything, or the Bible is like truer than truth? Right?
Oh my God, are we going to watch that clip? Oh my God, that part's my favorite.
Okay, we got some fracking coming up. We got some biblical interpretation coming up.
That part is
just to give some context too for how far Daddy has fallen. I mean, like back in the early 2010s, he was actually like a fairly respected Jungian professor
and
at
him,
U of T.
Right?
Yes,
didn't you take a class with him?
I was an undergrad at U of T around then. I did not actually take a class with him, but some of my friends were associated with the Jungian Society that he was running. So he was like a pretty respected, like moderately cool professor who like talked about the Bible and German philosophy and stuff.
I remember hanging out with you one time, and I think like the Jordan Peterson stuff first started kind of happening. And I remember you told me, you were like, oh, I know him. You're like, he's pretty good. Like I remember because you didn't know, like you're like I hear he's a great professor. Like you didn't know any of the shit
before he became dragged into the culture war bullshit. And then of course you see now like 10 years later, he's like, you can't fire me. I quit basically to the institution. So
but I can see why. Like I watched some of his lectures on line that he delivered at UT. And like he was a good lecturer. Like he was engaging. He kept the material down to earth. He always like talked to the audience. Sometimes I would sit there and be like, we were supposed to be talking about X, and now we've moved through to talking about Y, Z, and pretty much every letter of the alphabet, but we haven't even talked about X. But still, it was in a kind of an entertaining spiel, and you're like, okay, I can see why he'd be popular with students.
He knows how to give a good sermon in the classroom.
Yeah.
Definitely a sermon.
This is for a lot of people who feel alienated from religion, and now they're permissed to re-enter it through psychology.
Learn about chaos dragons and all the good stuff. Oh, yeah.
All right. So what do you say we start out with the first clip? You know what this clip is. It's from the very beginning.
It opens with a fucking bang.
Yeah.
It's kind of like one of those Star Wars movies where everyone begins with like a giant ship and like a battle or something like that. It's just like, man, how are you even going to fucking top that?
All right. Let's check this out.
It's requiring a lot of thinking, and then I have to like look at the criticisms of this guy and criticisms of the work, and who believes that in 10 years Miami's going to be underwater, who believes that this is probably hyperbole and that it's a gross exaggeration, and the reality is the world sort of always goes through these cycles of change, but human beings are definitely having an effect on it, but a small effect compared to cows and other things. It's like it's hard to sort out. The climate
cows, which have nothing to do with people at all.
Cows have nothing to do with agriculture. They just happen to be here.
Climate.
They just keep farting.
And that's what bothers me about the climate change types. It's like
the types.
This is something that bothers me about it. Technically, it's like climate is about everything. So okay, but your models aren't based on everything. Your models are based on a set number of variables.
Yeah.
So that means you've reduced the variables, which are everything, to that set. Well, how did you decide which set of variables to include in the equation if it's about everything? And that's not just a criticism. That's like, if it's about everything, your models aren't right. Because your models do not and cannot model everything.
What do you mean by everything when you say
it's a good question?
But that's what people who talk about the climate apocalypse claim in some sense. We have to change everything. It's like, everything, eh? Okay, and the same with the word environment. That word doesn't mean, it means so much that it actually doesn't mean anything. Like when you say everything,
means a lot,
in a sense, that's
not
meaningless,
everything.
right? Because, well, what are you pointing to? Well, I'm pointing to everything. Well, what's the difference between the environment
By the
and
way,
everything?
I'd like to interject and say this is from a man who once said that beliefs make the world in a more than metaphysical sense, now hectoring people about not being analytically precise enough when it comes to defining things like environment.
So climate is everything, including like literary enjoyment is part of climate. Like, I don't know, do you need to take that into account? It's just strange. It's a really weird.
Well, what I realized upon listening to this is that really every science is pseudoscientific, because physics is also about everything, allegedly. And who knows what the physicists are not actually incorporating.
Yeah, who knows
within
what
their
they're leaving
models.
out.
So I just think that we have to abandon Isaac Newton, Einstein, all those others.
It's kind of it kind of leads to like his on a serious point like that. His objection is really like a really stupid like skepticism. It's just like it's like the skeptical retort. It's like, well, you can't include everything. So
But what drives me nuts
probably doesn't
is like
matter.
probably 15 minutes after this, he says, my colleagues and I at the University of Toronto developed a schematic index to test individuals' creativity. So what? Did the creativity take into everything?
You take into
Take
exactly.
everything into account? Is it everything? Is creativity everything?
No,
Right.
he's just a climate scientist. Don't you understand? That's what it is.
Well, he's selected for variables.
Psychology is part of the climate.
He also
Yeah.
gets really uptight about people who criticize things like IQ, and he'll say things like, well, if you want to get rid of testing for things like IQ, then you might as well just get rid of the whole psychometric tradition, because it is the most accurate gauge we have of how it is that people actually behave and think. And it's like, really? So climate is more complicated than intelligence, and we aren't just abstracting from some variables there?
That's a good point. He takes a lot of like evolutionary psychological insights as like gospel as well,
We're lobsters. We're birds.
which is very much a dismal science.
We're bonobos.
Although actually, he never talks about bonobos. I noticed that.
Oh,
He always
chimps.
like
Sorry,
he always
chimps.
talks about chimpanzees. He doesn't talk about bonobos because bonobos would lead to socialist conclusions. So like
Yeah.
he likes to talk about
Aren't they matriarchal?
they're matriarchal, and they also solve all their problems by having orgies. And they're and
Yeah.
they're,
So
and they are,
they're dominated by chaos. They're a chaos species
Apparently,
of
a
primate.
lot of chimps are polyamorous. Yeah.
no chimps no that's
sorry, not
different.
chimps,
Bonobos,
apes.
it's very
Yeah,
different. No,
excuse
bonobos are so bonobos and chimps are actually both. I learned this evolutionarily. They're like they're just as close to us as chimpanzees. So like
Really?
they're just as close. They're actually pygmy chimpanzees basically.
But they're
Like,
Marxists.
But they're Marxists. They're
Marxists,
they're
indeed.
matriarchal. They're cooperative, and like they don't have wars. Whereas like chimpanzees are brutal, and they have wars and they kill each other. And like bonobos don't do that. They like as soon as tensions arise, like the females come in and basically just offer themselves up, and they diffuse everything with sex.
Well, it's like I always said, apparently there was one simian in that clan who conceived of the simian version of like John Lennon's Imagine, started playing it for them, and
Well,
then they
but-
all lay down their arms and decided that they were just gonna love one another. Sometimes.
Well, but I
physically,
think it is interesting to me. And I remember a while ago I read a book about how like they kind of observed the way like everybody likes to use chimpanzees as the example to talk about how brutal human beings are, but then don't talk about bonobos, even though we're just as related to bonobos. And Jordan Peterson does the same thing. He just talks about chimpanzees, about how brutal they are, and like the kind of warlike aspects of them, but neglects to talk about bonobos.
No, I've never found that kind of argument from evolutionary biology, particularly.
Biography, I like that. Evolutionary biography. What would that be?
Evolutionary
Let's make
biography.
that up. Oh, we should play that game again. What was that? That game where we where we invent words and decide what they're called.
Yeah. I mean, not a meaningless answer, but that. Ooh, beautiful. But no, I've never really found that argument from evolutionary biology all that strong, since there are plenty of instances where we've transcended the limitations of our biology, and that's a morally good thing.
Sure.
But what also baffles me about this is how little understanding he seems to have of the scientific method as expressed by somebody like Popper, because any decent scientist will point out that absolutely you have to exclude a huge number of variables in order to run experimental tests. I mean, how else would you actually produce anything that was of value? But science doesn't operate on a one-to-one basis where one individual runs a test and says, I've now concluded everything that there is that's worth knowing about a given phenomena. Science is cumulative because there are many different people in the scientific community who will sometimes run the same test again and again, and complementary tests. And through that, we gather a stream of knowledge about a given phenomena. And we've been doing that about the climate now for, what is it now, Pills? Like 60 years, 70 years or something like that. So there's really not much debate any longer. that whatever test you run, the Earth is getting warmer, and it has some association with the huge volume of hydrocarbons and other chemicals that we release into the air.
Okay, that was heavy.
Do you think
I just think it's hilarious that he gets off to a hot start like this. And right after this, I don't know, do you want to continue the clip?
Well, I was just going to say, though, like, does Joe Rogan challenge him on? Like,
Let's see.
okay, let's see.
It does kind of throw the gauntlet down a bit.
What's the
though.
difference between climate and everything? Well, there's no difference. So this is a crisis of everything? It's like, no, it's not.
Like the
Or if it
storms
is,
of
well,
Jupiter.
If it really is, then we're done because we can't fix everything.
Well,
but we have
specifically,
to.
What they mean specifically is the human, what human beings are doing that's causing the Earth to warm.
Right,
So
right.
it's
But you have
Joe
to
Rogan
include all the
patiently
factors
explaining the
involved.
Anthropocene to Jordan Peterson.
Man, I got
what
some
can you
respect
not
for Joe
include?
Rogan, actually, because
Well,
I haven't
then-
seen him since Fear
Joe
Factor.
Rogan is not nearly as bad as people are making him out to be. Like,
Yeah, he's a...
he platforms a lot of people that are like a bit whatever
True.
cringe.
But he's
or-
a bro.
But he also and he also gives them enough space with which to hang themselves, because like 3-hour conversations, you can kind of suss out like on what level people
I don't know
are.
how much of this you guys actually watched, but like I did watch like probably the first 2 hours like somewhat carefully, like watching, and it did feel to me like Joe Rogan was like a bit like puzzled by a lot of the stuff that Peterson was saying. Like I feel like, but when they used to have conversations in the past, Joe Rogan was relatively impressed by Peterson. Like he felt like they would go on riffs, but I did feel like this time Joe Rogan would be like a little bit like, I don't know.
He's asking those hard-hitting questions like, what do you mean by everything?
But this is what I
It's a
mean about him
necessary
circa
question.
2016 and him circa now. And I don't want to inter too much about his biography because that's neither here nor there. But back in the day, if you listen to him talk around 2016, 2018, he would be relatively analytically precise. He would acknowledge his limitations. And if he was talking about something that was outside of his disciplinary expertise, aside from postmodernism, he would usually say, like, this isn't something that I really know that much about, and kind of offer an opinion about it. Now he's just going off on all these wacky kind of tangents where he seems to assume that he knows everything there is to know about climate modeling, the scientific method, why it is that it doesn't apply in this circumstance. And you're just kind of like, dude, you're kind of getting out there now.
Well,
You're bordering on being that dude on the internet who sits there and is like, I am like a big fan of Scientology because I am a psychologist, a scientist, a metaphysical philosopher. I also stand against the elites who are trying to deny knowledge of these alien invasions to you. Like,
But that's the key word too, Matt, elites, right? He's just adopted the ultimate contrarian position. Like, it's not really even about climate so much. It's just like about saying the craziest thing right off the bat, just to let you know, like, he's done with the system, man. He's just
Well,
gonna,
it's just
like,
it's a
yeah.
really stupid way of like just casting doubt. That's what I meant earlier when I said like skepticism. It's just like a really weak like way of getting into this skeptical argument, which is like the most. Like I remember when I was in my philosophy grad school and my master's, like that was kind of like the argumentative moves that people would do is kind of like the last ditch, like kind of nuclear option. It's just like, well, skepticism, you can't know anything, right? It's like the last ditch nuclear option. In a way, he's like pressing that button here when he's like, well, it's about everything. Can't account for
I don't
everything.
want to continue on this because it's kind of boring, but he does go into all of the benefits of fracking after this. You think he's like on the Heritage Foundation?
Well, actually, you should play that.
Point?
It's kind of funny because Joe Rogan does challenge him on that. It's pretty funny.
I mean, we don't know anything about this. He obviously doesn't know anything about it, but like the benefits of fracking, you don't kill the oceans.
No, but
you know?
there's literally a point when Joe Rogan's like, but it pollutes the water and stuff. He's like, not really. Like, what? You should. I wish you had that queued up.
Listen, when the BP oil spill happened, it created all kinds of new species as they mutated because there are now all kinds of healthy chemicals in the water that weren't there before. That's
actually. So I was gonna share before. There's like someone I know. Like I'm gonna withhold their name for this, but like it's they sent me an email. They're someone academic, and they sent me this story, and they said, you know, I was a very good friend of Jordan Peterson back in the day. I haven't seen him or Tammy since 1998. He used to talk about academia as a benign social and political force in mainstream society.
Is this to you personally?
Yeah.
Oh.
He's like, he complained then about postmodernism and political correctness. I never thought that I would look back at our conversation between friends over dinner and alcohol would someday lead to his ideas becoming so public and him becoming so popular. I remember often telling him he was an idiot, you know, like friends do when they disagree. It's made me rethink how some of those ideas can take on a life of their own. So yeah, it's just funny that like even back
so
then.
I have that queued up. Everything is postmodernists.
Okay, good.
Let's see what he says about that.
The story of Abraham's a very cool story because Abraham's like 80 years old living in his father's tent.
Oh, we have to
Talk
do
about
some
failure
Bible
to
stuff
launch.
first, of course.
And God shows up one day and says,
I love the Bible
you have to
one.
leave everything you know and journey out into the unknown. And you think, well, what is that? Well, that's the call to adventure. That's what it is. And so, and what happens to Abraham is it's a bloody catastrophe. Like the first thing he runs into is a war, and then he goes into a totalitarian state, Egypt, and they try to steal his wife. And it's like, man, he's thinking, things are pretty good in that tent. But, well, he goes on this tremendous adventure, and then he's the forefather of you know, biblically speaking, half the people on the planet. He has this tremendous adventure. Think, well, what do you set against the suffering of your life? Well, the adventure of your life. That's what you set against it. It's not safety. You forget about that. There's no safety for mortals, that's for sure. And besides, safety? That's what you want? You don't want that. You want adventure. So then the question is, where's adventure to be found? In exploitation. Well, try it and see. Hell is to be found in exploitation. How about
Who
truth?
thinks adventure is to be found in exploitation?
Well, that's kind of the claim that everything's about power. Everything's motivated by power.
Is that really what people say, though? Who says that?
Modernists all say that.
That's such a silly expression.
Yeah, but that is what
Everything-
Joe
But
puts
that's
his hand up in
Love
Sunday
motivated by
school.
power?
Yes. That's why
That's
they
the
distrust
Zizek.
love.
Is art
Where are
motivated by
the
power?
communists?
Yes,
So when
the
you're-
mouthpiece of political ideology.
When you're making paintings, that's motivated by power?
Yes, because you want to
Really?
climb up the socioeconomic status hierarchy.
By painting? That's ridiculous.
You're just not very good at
Okay,
it.
what about music?
Same thing.
Motivated by power.
You bet. Everything's
Really?
motivated by power. Well, that was
It's
the
at this
answer
point
that
you
came
can
out of
tell, like,
France in
Jordan knows the hole he's
1970s,
dug
and that was
himself
the
into,
answer
but he's
that
just
all the
gonna keep
universities
digging.
accepted.
Yeah.
Everything's. Why do you think that the whole
mean,
cultural
I do-
critique is
to be fair-
patriotic
Children
oppression?
finger
Don't you
painting.
think
Power.
Okay, so hold on. To be fair, I do think that like there's a like so Jordan Peterson's not explaining it properly, but like there is a way in which you could talk about Foucauldian power as like actually being, but it's a different kind of power, like because Jordan Peterson's conflating like a kind of Marxist like oppressor and oppressed form of power, whereas Foucault talks about power as like actually a creative energy that makes the social like constitutive impossible.
But that's weird, and this is something that we pointed out in our text, because he should know that,
should know the
because
difference.
he's somebody who spent a lot of time claiming that he read a lot of Nietzsche and caring about that. And that's more or less the way that Nietzsche understands power.
Oh
right?
yeah, yeah, you're right. You're
As
right.
this kind of creative force that's dynamic, can be destructive, but can create values also.
That's true.
And
Yeah.
Foucault means it in a very similar sense, a more critical sense, because of course he talks about structures of domination and discipline. But he also never denies that power can be creative, productive, can allow you to express your identity or even create your identity in various iterative ways. Like, really, this shouldn't be all that mysterious to somebody who apparently has spent a lot of time reading single paragraphs of Nietzsche and talking about them at great length in his class for hours at a time.
Well, the best part of this was that Joe Rogan, like, if someone paints, they're just trying to get power. Absolutely.
They're trying to
By
move up the
painting?
socioeconomic hierarchy through like
By painting, yeah. Jackson Pollock was like thirsty for that attention.
I mean, I don't know. I think that's the only. I mean, I guess power is the
When
only thing
Vincent
that
Van Gogh
could.
cut his fucking ear off,
Power
he was
is
just-
the only thing that can explain why the hell fucking Jackson Pollock got popular. I mean, that says the person who knows nothing about art. But
Vincent Van Gogh, when he chopped his ear off, was just like, man, I'm gonna get so many girls
No.
from this. Like, fucking, like, they're gonna dig this more than anything else in the whole goddamn world.
I'm moving up in the world.
do you guys like Jackson Pollock paintings though? Like honestly, like
Jackson, you got to see him live, man. You got
what
to
do
see
you
him
mean
live.
live? What are you talking
In an
about?
You got to
gallery.
see them in the
Oh,
gallery.
really? Okay, yeah.
To the
One of
extent I
those
know
things.
anything
That's
about
not
art,
aesthetic
I kinda
art though.
prefer-
Like that's just more intellectual art. It's like, oh,
Yeah,
let's,
that's the
let's
thing,
let's
okay.
let's riff on this. But that's a different kind of art. To that
So I mean,
point.
whereas Van
Yeah.
Gogh, it's like I get it. Like I've never even seen a Van Gogh live, but like I get it. You know.
Honestly, I know next to nothing about visual arts. I mean, it's interesting and I appreciate them, but to the extent I have any kind of preference, it's usually for abstract modernism, occasionally a little bit of Paul art, but I cannot explain to you why that appeals to me. It just kind of does. Maybe if you push me.
Let's see if he goes a little bit further in this clip.
Done a lot by people
know he
that
does.
have not taken those chances, that diminishing of effort by calling a painter or a musician and saying that those people are motivated by power. These are from career intellectuals who don't venture outside of the universities.
They don't venture outside the prisons of their own imagination.
Or the echo chambers that exist.
Yeah. No, I think a tremendous amount of it.
So
I mean,
they
this
try
was
to
Nietzsche's
dismiss.
observation, and
Oh my
Orwell's
God.
too,
I
is
think-
that a lot of that.
See, this is what I'm talking about. Like,
Okay, yeah, you got it. You got it right there. He's talking about, like, these people read Nietzsche fanatically. Foucault,
Yeah.
Deleuze, Baudrillard.
I mean, he wrote a whole book called fucking Nietzsche.
They masturbated to Nietzsche, and he's like, well, Nietzsche would call these people resentful cowards.
Yeah, and it's extremely annoying also because, again,
I mean, Nietzsche probably would call all of those people. He would think that all those people are wrong.
no, yeah, absolutely, he probably wouldn't appreciate the,
But not in the way,
appropriation of
that Peterson thinks that he would.
But I mean, Nietzsche was one of the first people to say that artistic creation is about power, but like Victor pointed out, not this kind of power
In an
as
oppressor
understood
and
in an
oppressed.
oppressor-oppressed narrative, but in the sense that you want to affirm your life through creation and see
Self-overcoming.
yourself and overcome yourself exactly through these processes of creating new values, artistic projects, or new grand politics, right? Like,
But that's
this
where
is pretty
if
one-on-one
we-
also. It's not hard to realize that that's what he's going for if you read any of the books relatively carefully.
If we want to go deep into Nietzsche here, though, his appeal constantly is back to Western civilization or, traditional values, which is the thing that was Nietzsche's greatest enemy, was traditional. I mean, maybe not socialism. He kind of hated too.
Yeah, but
Traditional values.
He hated a lot
He
of
said
things.
this is just something invented. Whereas Peterson goes, no, these are natural forms. They exist in lobsters, birds, chimpanzees, and humans. And we're trying to turn away from this balance between order and chaos.
Yeah, I mean, Nietzsche, didn't he just hate anything that was like stagnant? Like, so anything that wasn't cultivating like the best humans from flourishing, and like tradition is one of those strongest forces that prevents human beings from flourishing. So while he has very strong anti-socialist, anti-egalitarian, he would also like, it's also just clearly not the case that he would like some sort of fascist alternative, because the problem with all those other arrangements is they also lead to stagnation. It's all about like this perpetual state of self-overcoming and self-creation that like no one could ever achieve, but like that's what Nietzsche wanted. Like he would hate anything else other than that.
I think the problem runs a lot deeper than that, though, because one of the things where Nietzsche innovates upon conventional and frankly less intelligent reactionaries is he points out in a number of his books that the reason Christianity and Christian traditionalism failed wasn't because of some external force, it's because Christianity self-secularized. He points out in one of his books, I think it's The Genealogy of Morals, that the final act of Christianity was to ask its last question, which was, it's so dedicated to truth for such a long time, and then it has to question the truth of itself. Right? And he points out that this is the kind of damning moment where you're so committed to this kind of Platonic project that you ask yourself, is the Platonic Christian project worth anything? And the second thing that he points out is that the real inheritors of the Christian tradition aren't the reactionaries. They're the liberals, the Democrats, the socialists, everybody who kind of is invested in mass egalitarian society because they're predicated on the same resentment that early Christianity was. So the weird thing is, from a Nietzschean perspective, if you really want to be consistent, the SJWs that he hates so much are the true inheritors of the Christian tradition, whereas he's defending his weird kind of Nietzschean traditionalist hierarchies, which are a bastardization both of traditionalism and of Christianity and of Nietzscheanism.
A lot of that's motivated by resentment.
We should
Tremendous
be-
amount of it.
I think that's 100% true. And I think we should be very careful if people aren't charitable. Very careful if people aren't nice. And people that, I mean, there's
Great Joe
people that
Rogan
make a
quote.
career
I think that's 100%
just
true.
insulting and shitting on people all the time. And they
There's something
never
soothing
can
about his
look at
voice, though.
things
Have you
from
ever noticed that?
person's
Oh, yeah.
perspective.
No, I
Well, that
would-
is the expression of power then.
Yes.
Yeah.
It
I always
is.
think you
But
think
it's not.
everything's about power. It's like, that's a confession, buddy.
The problem with that is it attacks your own perceptions of yourself.
Yes.
Because you know who you are. You know what you're doing.
That sounds familiar.
You know, if you're just doing
Yeah,
that.
well, what attitude do you have to yourself
Right.
if you believe the only true expression of human existence is to be found in the will to power?
It's
It's
crazy.
like, okay, you're a psychopath.
Right. Well, it's
And,
also
and
like,
even more when you're pretending not to be. God,
Exactly.
a dismal viewpoint.
what about friendship? Like, is that power too?
It's all manipulation.
It's like-
You know the
That's great.
saddest
That's a
thing?
person
There's
who's ever
actually only
hung out
like
with
5
good
years
buddies.
between these
Yeah, that's
guys.
for
And
sure.
like Peterson
Ridiculous.
sounds like a sickly
yeah.
dying
The
man.
best
Rogan's
part
like
of-
the Chad Rogan.
It's sad also because
Oh,
you know,
man.
my wife Miriam points out that one of the most beautiful things Foucault ever wrote was actually about homosexuality, where he said one of the reasons that it poses such a threat to the established order is precisely because it indicates that there are other kinds of loving attachments that human beings can make that might transcend the domains of domineering power. And domineering power doesn't want that. So if anything, Foucault was really sensitive to this, right? That you should want more friendships, more relations, more kinds of ways of expressing yourself with people who recognize that. It's kind of sad.
I don't know if he's wrong that building your life around a Nietzschean will to power would mean that he says you'd be like a psychopath. I don't know if that's that far off.
No, it's about the joie de vivre was what Nietzsche's thing.
I agree with you, but like,
I mean, I don't know if you would. I don't know if you would actually be a psychopath. But like, it's not an absurd statement that like it would be problematic, because I mean, why does Nietzsche always talk about? He talks about like the great souls are those like, it's like the eagle or whatever who eats the lamb or
they
whatever.
Are isolated. It's true.
They're isolated, and like so like it's not like they're evil in the sense that like they want the lamb to suffer. It's that they don't think about the lamb. They just eat it, right? And it's like, so that is kind of sociopathic.
Pills, can you think of a better model for the Nietzschean will to power in film than Daniel Plainview? That's the real question here. Is there anyone else who better exemplifies that kind of isolating?
Ooh, that's good.
From
and he is very much a psychopath.
Because if that's the poster child for Nietzschean kind of like ideology played through to its logical conclusion,
I mean,
that's a typical interpretation of Nietzsche, but there's also like artistic interpretations.
There's existential interpretations of it, and like, I mean, I even like identify with some of those like more nice flowery interpretations, but like, I don't think Papa Peterson's totally wrong here.
Have any of you seen the anime series Berserk? Cuck Philosophy did a really good video of this.
No.
Oh, too bad. I love Berserk.
We gotta finish. We gotta finish this clip.
Sometimes held up as a Nietzschean hero, right? In there.
I've never watched it.
Really, it's such a good anime. Watch it now.
Ridiculous. It's ridiculous. The best part of friendships is laughing and joking around with each other.
Yeah, that's for sure. That's the play, for sure. Absolutely.
It's the best part.
Yeah, well, so if you're in a humorless group, what's going on. But that's the same thing as killing the comedians. It's the same thing.
That is an issue.
Are we in a humorless group?
That is a problem.
I'm a postmodern neo-Marxist.
Capable of generating it themselves. They resent it.
Well, that's another reason why I trust you.
I mean,
I've watched
the most humorless person is Papa Peterson.
He's funny. He's actually funny. Like,
no,
seriously
he's having
funny.
fun here.
And, like, seriously funny. Because you go very dark places very successfully, and it's very funny to watch. It's like, is he really going to do that? Your Kardashian devil is like, that's one of the funniest things I've ever seen.
Feels very forced.
You know, that's a good an indication of that investigation of the shadows, right? You went way in there. What spirit is possessing?
All right, whatever he's doing there.
I mean, it feels...
This guy is just a really weird dude. You know,
he is a really weird dude.
I don't know how he fell into this position of like Harvard psychologist, U of T psychologist, but whatever is going on here, he's like an eccentric.
Well, it's easy. Like I don't want to say it's easy, but like doing psychology is like.
You're gonna say, psychology.
You're gonna have to back away from where the implications of that statement pretty fast.
Well, I mean, it's just like it's.
Any of you listening to this are psychologists. We don't mean to condemn.
Who was it? I feel like someone recently said, I forget who it was that said this, but like it was like when you become a hyper educated person in like one narrow field, people like.
I said that. It's called ultra crepidarianism.
No, but that you can go but one of two ways.
Yeah, where you can either know that you know nothing about anything else, or you think that you're an expert in everything.
Yeah, you're like, I'm really good at this, so I must be good at everything else. And I think that's what Papa Peterson's falling into here, which is really dumb. And I think
because he chastises other people.
And
for
the thing is,
sin.
like this is actually the danger of that. This is why I think psychology is clearly more vulnerable to this. Like I think any sort of social science or science, it's like philosophy is like one of the places where I think it's like built in. It's kind of part of the system. Is like. You're much more likely to go like the former route, right? Where you're like, I don't know anything about anything else. I mean, I don't know any philosopher who claims to be like, oh well, like I'm in psychology, like no problem.
I mean, I do. In fact, it used to be a recurring thing at the bar.
How about you?
People would ask me like, why are you doing a degree in law? You're smart enough to be a philosopher. I'm like, oh well, thank you. That's so nice of you to say.
But Peterson definitely is like, it's just really funny that he doesn't realize. Like how he's making a lot of sweeping statements about stuff he clearly hasn't read like enough of. It's very strange.
All right, we're gonna get to King Arthur in a second, but first,
no, he doesn't ruin that, does he? Oh,
before we get to King Arthur, I wanna go to Jordan Peterson and Joe Rogan on Are We White?
Oh, good. Oh yeah, this is a good one.
Man, the hits keep coming with us, eh?
And really famous, like not just famous, but famous as like a worldwide. You know, depending on who you ask, either you're a voice of reason and rationality and personal responsibility, or you're a voice of intolerance and bigotry and anger and hateful.
Sexual oppression.
What did Michael
prejudice.
Eric Dyson call you? A mean angry white man?
And a mean, angry white man. Yeah.
Hilarious.
Yeah, yeah.
You're not mean at all.
Yeah, yeah.
That's what's dumb about that statement. You're not mean at all.
I am white. Actually, that's a lie, too. I'm kind of tan.
There
And
we
he
go.
was actually not white. He was sort of
Fuck am
brown.
I?
Wow.
'Cause I'm
We're actually
This
gonna
guy's
go
like
Yeah,
a
yeah,
white
yeah,
ghoul.
But
He's-
neither of us are white.
well, I'm Italian.
Oh, no.
And he was
mostly.
brown, not black.
Well, isn't that weird?
Yeah, it's really
the
weird.
black and white thing is so strange because
Even the way he says it's like,
Tan
wow,
and
there's something
brown.
deep.
There's
and
such a
Okay,
story
wait,
about
wait.
it.
Two white guys arrived at the conclusion on their own
they're
that
not white.
whiteness and blackness are social constructs. Is that what they just realized?
I know, it's beautiful. It's like no one has ever said that before. Like, wow, baffling. So it turns out that a lot of what we associate with race is just arbitrary. Who would have thought that?
Yeah, that's funny. I mean, I think I saw David Pakman talking about how like he was talking about that clip also, and he was kind of saying, you know, he's like, this is an insight that I had when I was like in grade 5. It's like my skin's not actually white.
Wait.
It's actually more like beige. And he's like, this is literally an insight I had when I was in grade 5. And they're talking about it. He's like, I remember talking to my teacher and being like, I'm not really white. I'm like beige. And it's like, and like here we are with Peterson and Joe Rogan, like having that
Two
insight.
55-year-old men. Oh, God.
I wonder what happened to him if he actually went to a beach for a little while. He would walk out and he's like, I am now a colored individual. I can't believe it. I have completely transformed my identity.
I actually haven't heard the rest of this clip.
Oh, it gets a lot worse.
Oh, God, okay.
There's such a spectrum of shades of people. Unless you're talking to someone who is like 100% African from the darkest place where they're not wearing any clothes all day and they've developed all their
God.
melanin to protect themselves from the sun. You know, even the term black is weird. And when you use it for people that are literally my color, it becomes very strange.
Yeah.
You know,
oh,
This is
God.
true.
it's like,
So you were asking me what it was like.
what is it like to be you? Like, what is it like to? And then I know, you know, you've gone through a lot of shit. And
So let's turn it back to him. God, that was hard.
No, but I just want to point out that when you're trying to get pissed off at people for calling you an angry white man, and then you go into like, in the darkest parts of Africa, there are people.
No, but
who
that was
wander
Joe
around."
Rogan, to be
And
fair.
also-
That was-
and also-
yeah.
And then he gets there, he's like, well, but nobody
No,
actually
but
has
the
a
proper,
skin color.
but the real insight there was when he was like, you know, calling me an angry white man. It's like, well, I'm not really white. I'm like actually like beige.
Yeah.
Like there's, you know, it's
The thing is, it's such a stereotypically like white.
I used the
He just
Photoshop
couldn't help
eyedropper
himself,
tool on
though.
my skin, and it wasn't actually white.
No. You see how he got there too? At first he's just saying, no, I'm not actually angry. And by the way, I'm not actually white. And by the way, I'm coming out as trans right now. Like he just, anything the guy labeled him as, he was just like, yeah.
I wish we had more precision in language. You know, we should really be talking about the beige.
No,
We should talk about beige
And brown.
Well,
beige privilege.
what's interesting is in Brazil or countries like that, they do actually kind of differentiate between like degrees of whiteness
do,
or
yeah.
blackness.
Same with South
It's
Africa.
not quite like the North American experience is not universal, but the way these guys are like clumsily stumbling into this is just like,
It's the same in Mexico. They
yeah,
differentiate
yeah.
between about 4 different categories of people.
yeah, same
And
with
it's-
South Africa. That's what's his name? That the host of the Daily Show talks about that.
Trevor Noah.
Trevor Noah?
I mean, isn't that is the point? Is like these are socially constructed categories for specific reasons.
Culturally contingent.
we have
yeah.
them for reasons, like the one drop rule. Obama's the first black president. There's a reason.
This is really
for
heavy.
That. Yeah, it's plaster. Okay.
That was glorious.
Now we are going to move into the literature section. There's lots of Bible stuff too that we can.
Oh,
go
the
over.
Bible stuff is
He's
so
gonna
good.
get teary-eyed.
Oh, do you
Just
want
the truth
okay,
stuff.
wait.
I really like the truth stuff.
Do you want Jordan Peterson cries about music or the King Arthur stuff first?
I don't know.
King
if I
Arthur,
remember.
man, King
right,
Arthur.
I got-
Let's-
yeah,
You've been
we got Lidvik
you've
here.
been teasing us.
We got
Come on.
Lidvik here.
They got Lidvik,
Deconstruct
yeah.
Camelot.
So when Arthur first grips the sword,
Oh God.
he's blown off it. Now he can pull it out of the stone because he's the guy. He's the long lost son of the rightful king. Long lost. You said, well, wasn't everybody opposing the tyranny of the times? It's like, yeah, welcome to the world, man. Welcome to the world. We're all long lost sons of the rightful king. And the king's now a tyrant. And don't we have to deal with that? And the answer is bloody well right we do. So Arthur, who's got his eyes open and he's born in straitened circumstances and has to grow up street smart, and his friends are all funny and they engage in witty repartee, and like he knows the world from the ground up, grabs the sword, he can pull it out of the stone, but he's blown right off it. He can't wield it because he has visions of his evil uncle who conspired with feminine forces of chaos and killed his father, murdered his father and his mother. So his uncle is a murderer. His uncle's a murderer. Well, so is your uncle. And so is my uncle. That's our historical guilt that the lefties weaponize all the time. It's like the soil we walk on is soaked with blood.
We need
And
more
Arthur
precision
can't
on our
wield the
speech,
sword
guys.
that's his rightfully.
So when Simba takes the sword from the stone, the important thing to remember is Scar's legacy is tainting him. But you see, Simba is one of the beige lions, so he's not dark like Scar. So.
And the evil leftists always try to weaponize the Lion King against us by pointing out the tyrannical systems that are taking place in Africa.
Yeah, that's.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, it's funny. Is there more? I want to hear more.
It's like, how do you know your masculine ambition isn't part of the world-destroying force? Because yes, it is. So then why, when I accuse you of racism and so forth, and your white privilege and your masculine privilege, like, why don't you just wander off in a corner and feel terrible and apologize? And the answer is, you probably will, because most people do. You don't, but most people do, and I know why. Partly because they're reasonable. If 30 people come after you and say, you're a racist tyrant, and there's 30 of them, you go home and you think, well, 30 people think I'm a racist tyrant, and like, I got my flaws, man, and I might be a little racist because we all have in-group preferences, and I shoot my mouth off sometimes, and I haven't always been the way with women that I should be, and maybe I've mistreated some people, and maybe I did it too much, and sorry. And then you're a shell, right? Another mob comes for you. It doesn't work at all.
Do you think that this is a factor of this new way of communicating where everyone's communicating all at once? It's not just these small groups of people that you're familiar with that are in your tribe or that you interact with from other tribes. This is like unprecedented volume of human beings.
I think
All right, so I mean, it goes on, but
Well,
the
I
meaning
think-
of the Arthurian myth is we shouldn't feel like settler guilt, and I think we should actually all take a moment here to
Well, I think-
acknowledge our male privilege.
Well, I
Like, if
think-
anyone wants to go into the corner, got a corner there.
Well, of
As
course,
Canadian, I would like
because
to
Arthur, as we
apologize
know,
for
was the
everything.
original indigenous inhabitant of the English Isles, and he was fighting off the colonizing Saxons. So, very apt reference, Jesus. Yeah, it's...
Yeah, you know, it's funny, his analysis of like the whole guilt complex thing, like, I guess like what it's sort of like missing to me is, well, like, there's also a way in which people enjoy like their guilt too, like a psychoanalytic thing. that I think, like,
Jouissance.
yeah, which I think he's like not, which is like interesting because he is like technically psychoanalytically trained. But like, so it's kind of funny that I don't know anything about Jungian psychoanalysis.
He does, to be fair, bring this up in Maps of Meaning.
Okay, he
when-
does. Okay,
Which was
just
the most
because honestly,
sophisticated
because
book.
there he's just like talking about like the social force that makes us feel guilty. But I think like people really lean into that guilt for like jouissance reasons, right? But yeah, no, that's funny. It's funny.
No, yeah. I mean, this is another point where once upon a time I would have... his analysis was considerably more sophisticated because he points out how it is that many people will sublimate their guilt, and this is kind of the Nietzschean theme, right? As various kinds of value systems, right? And then they try to impose them upon others. It's not nearly as creative or interesting as Nietzsche, and he doesn't draw as many radical conclusions, but he was aware at least of the dynamic that you're talking about. Now he just seems to be running from King Arthur to talking about colonization, to talking about male privilege, to talking about how men shrink online because they're being confronted with all kinds of other people. Who knows, right?
Shall we go to the Bible?
Absolutely.
Yeah, I'd love to.
This is the clip that you picked, Victor. All right, let's see what he says here.
if categories dissolve, especially fundamental ones, the culture is dissolving because the culture is a structure of category. That's what it is.
Right.
So, and in fact, culture is a
Wait for it.
structure of category that we all share. So we see things the same way. Well, that's why we can talk. I mean, not exactly the same way, because then we'd have nothing to talk about. But roughly speaking, we have a bedrock of agreement. That's the Bible, by the way.
Oh my God.
So I just walked through the Museum of the Bible in
Yeah,
Washington.
this is crazy.
That was very cool. It's a very cool museum.
So the structure, that's what the Bible
Yeah, it's what I figured out.
provides.
I just figured this out this week.
Figured it out,
So
guys.
it was a cool thing to walk through because it's chronological. They have one floor which is the history of the Bible. But it's not exactly that. It's really what it is the history of the book. Now, in many ways, the first book was the Bible. I mean, literally, because at one point there was only one book. Like, as far as our Western culture is concerned, there was one book. And for a while, literally, there was only one book. And that book was the Bible. And then before it was the Bible, it was it was scrolls and it was writings on papyrus. But we were starting to aggregate written text together. And it went through all sorts of technological transformations. And then it became books that everybody could buy, the book everybody could buy. And the first one of those was the Bible. And then it became all sorts of books that everybody could buy. But all those books, in some sense, emerged out of that underlying book. And that book itself, the Bible isn't a book, it's a library. It's a collection of books. And so
It literally means
what I figured
book
out
of
was
books.
partly because I was talking to my brother-in-law, Jim Keller, who's the world's greatest chip designer and has now designed a chip that's as powerful as the human brain, which is optimized for artificial intelligence learning, by the way. And so I talked to him about that. He said, "You heard of the internet?"
All right, so we
Yeah,
got.
but hold on.
We
there's-
got. Is it better?
Oh my God, there's
Okay,
there's like
okay,
a
we'll
part-
keep going.
The crescendo is unbelievable.
Okay, well, we'll wait for the crescendo. I just want to. I mean,
Like,
there's-
let's get some initial reaction.
we know what he's saying. Like the Bible is the foremost book in the Western world, and I mean, he goes on to say that The Hobbit is like based in the original story, which is the
Yeah.
story of the Bible.
Yeah.
But anyway, we got Litvik here. So any response?
Well, actually, The Hobbit is based on the story of Beowulf, as any Tolkien scholar would know, but I will refer judgment. No, he's clumsily stumbling into some pretty obvious truisms about, obviously, the Bible's place in the Western canon. But yeah, just the way that, like, he very clumsily kind of grasps for these things. I notice also, like, he makes these super vague statements, of course, and just backs them up with like this smidgen of cultural authority. Well, King Arthur, well, Moses, well. So that's how he keeps getting away with like these really pedestrian kind of basic observations, obvious truisms. But yes, let's get to the crescendo.
Out of curiosity, though, I just want to ask. My understanding is that the first written mythology was the Epic of Gilgamesh. I'm not sure about that.
Actually, yes, the Enuma Elish specifically, the
okay.
Babylonian creation myth, which a lot of the Bible was based off of. Yeah, but it's true. Yes, it all goes back to the ancient Near East, and like pretty much every culture in that region like had their own kind of like Bible, as it were, and like this is just the one that we kind of ended up with because of the Roman thing. Yeah.
I understand that. It's just that was my understanding of what the world's first book was, and yeah, obviously it has a lot of descendants and stuff. But anyway, neither here nor there.
Yeah.
And the great Christian Beowulf, who is known for his charity,
His effective piety.
sacrifice,
Yeah.
his
Self-sacrificing
piety.
quality.
Okay, all right, we're getting to the crescendo.
Yeah, let's go. I think
resume
there's
here.
a crescendo. Hope I didn't
Adieu,
overpromise.
I've heard of the internet. He said, "This is way more revolutionary than that." So, in any case, we were talking about
How
meaning in
fucking
text because we were talking about
melodramatic this guy
translation
is,
and the
like-
problem
So
of
melodramatic.
understanding
Everything's
text.
so
And
serious.
Jim said, "The meaning of words is coded in the relationship of the words to one another." And the postmodernists make that case that all meaning is derived from the relationship between words. That's wrong because, well, what about rage? That's not words. And what about moving your hand? That's not words. So it's wrong, but part of it's right because the meaning we derive from the verbal domain is encoded in the relationship between words. So now then you think, well, let's think about the relationship between words. Well, some words are dependent on other words. Some ideas are dependent on other ideas. The more ideas are dependent on a given idea, the more fundamental that idea is. That's a definition of fundamental. So now imagine you have an aggregation of texts in a civilization. You say,
Wait
which are the
for it.
fundamental texts? And the answer is, the texts upon which most other texts depend. And so you'd put Shakespeare way in there in English because so many texts are dependent on Shakespeare's literary revelations. And Milton would be in that category, and Dante would be in that category, at least in translation. Fundamental authors, part of the Western canon, not because of the arbitrary dictates of power, but because those texts influenced more other texts. And then you think about that as a hierarchy, okay, with the Bible at its base, which is certainly the case. Now imagine that's the entire corpus of linguistic production, all things considered. Now, how do you understand that? Like, literally, how do you understand that? The answer is you sample it by reading and listening to stories and listening to people talk. You sample that whole domain. You build a low-resolution representation of that inside you, and then you listen and see through that. And so it isn't that the Bible is true.
Here we go.
It's that the Bible is the precondition for the manifestation of truth, which makes it way more true than just true. It's a whole different kind of true. And I think this is not only literally the case, factually, I think it can't be any other way. It's the only way we can solve the problem of perception.
This is going to sound really good.
This is a dope syllabus. He's describing that so
Wait. He said too many words too fast. I agreed with half of them, and maybe this is his style. I agreed with half of what he said,
salad.
but I couldn't follow the line of like the Bible is truer than truth
because it's fundamental, because it's like everything else
the Bible's status as a divine text doesn't even matter because of how much it's influenced in Western culture. That's what he's saying.
But he's also saying power had nothing to do with this, like the fact that Christian nations were the ones that colonized the rest of the earth, or
this is what bothers me.
And the fact that Christianity didn't just invent these myths, that they stole them all in the first place, or
exactly. Well, we were just talking about how like Gilgamesh and all these other things.
Yeah,
it's like, so those are more fundamental. Those are more true.
So Iraq is the true civilization.
Yeah, well, that's on his account. That would
be fair. This is the problem with the broken clock, right? Twice a day he is right. No, there is something distinctive about the way that message was articulated in arguably the Hebrew Bible, because it was no longer based off of just like, okay, fixed at a specific temple or whatever. It became more text-based, and that's how it could circulate more easily. But now we're getting into actual anthropology, which is not what he wants to talk about. He just wants to talk about, Disney and King Arthur. But yeah, that's the problem. He grounds half of his rants in something that's like debatably kind of obvious, and then he just goes off on his tangents. So yeah.
And that's what he figured out. He was like, I figured it out. It's the fundamental truth. The Bible
figured it out
truer than true. Yeah.
This week.
I don't think that he actually figured that out. This is what I was getting at, because to my mind, like, there's nothing that he's saying there that somebody like Harold Bloom hasn't said before.
Much more eloquently.
And what's much more interesting about Bloom is that he actually takes postmodernism seriously as the latest evolution of the Western tradition, right? Yeah, exactly. And what's also irritating to me about this, aside from the fact that he seems to conflate structuralism and post-structuralism, is that he doesn't even acknowledge the fact that a lot of people have come up with exactly the same things that he said.
Conflating structuralism and post-structuralism. Like, what a fucking noob.
I know, right?
He doesn't even say structuralism or post-structuralism, though. He just says postmodernism and France in the 70s.
Yeah, but I mean, beyond that, I mean, just, I don't know what you think about this, Vic, but I mean, to my mind, if you were to read any volume of like Harold Bloom, he'd be a lot more knowledgeable and a lot more complex and making exactly the same kind of assertions. And he would at least acknowledge the fact that, like Pills was saying, there's a big counter argument to this whole hagiography of the Western tradition, which is that there is an association between the hegemony of these belief systems and power. And that's something that's continuously contested in the Western tradition itself, right? Should we actually venerate these texts and give them the kind of status they do? Which, of course, is also the subject of a huge amount of great literature, including pieces like Shakespeare.
Yeah, didn't Harold Bloom say that Shakespeare invented the individual human?
Yeah, through like Hamlet's soliloquies and everything, that there was no reflection before that. Again, it's like overblown statements, but you get what they're trying to say, like artistically.
Happened to the camera.
But this is what I mean, though. Like, if you look at somebody like Hamlet, as Bloom and others point out, as like the quintessential modern skeptic, right? The person who questions the text that he's inherited.
Just happened.
One of the interesting things about this is, of course, you can situate him as a kind of counter-hegemonic figure, right? Somebody who doesn't buy into the idea that his father is literally there, even though he says, this is ordained and there's this divine ordered nature. That's why it is that you can see me. And there's such a reduction of the Western tradition through this kind of analysis that it actually seems kind of impoverished to me, rather than enlightening or in any way, shape, or form like inspiring.
No, absolutely.
Fuck
And
that
like
guy.
even implicit in the Bible itself, of course, there's a very revolutionary message in that way. So it's kind of hard to even see ultimately what he's arguing for here. But
this is what I mean when I said it used to be more complex also, because in Maps of Meaning, he would talk about criticism of idolatry, for example, right? And there's a huge amount of that in the Bible, which is extremely important, right? And the way that people will turn from dogmas into these kind of calcified systems that you're just supposed to venerate as tradition, as given. And he points out that idolatry can become stale. You need to continuously confront that. And that all seems to be gone now. Now he's just going on his long tangents about Arthur and, hyper masculine stuff and how it is that the Bible is truer and truer. God only knows.
it's a shame though, yeah, because like there obviously is a hunger and like a curiosity for these kinds of like more intellectual conversations about the status of Western texts and the canon, like the Harold Bloom stuff, to your point. Yeah. And he's really, there aren't too many other people who are kind of like even remotely addressing this stuff. So he just kind of falls into this gap. And yeah, people still take him half seriously in some cases, but yeah.
Because I mean, I agree. I mean, if you're going to get a good education in Western philosophy or any subject, you do need to have a kind of working knowledge of the Hebrew Bible and the Christian Bible. Yeah. And I don't think anyone would deny that. What some people would deny is that we should treat that as gospel, right? You know, to kind of coin a phrase. And what's interesting, of course, is that there are some texts within the religious tradition that would also be critical of the notion that we should take everything that a religious person has said to be gospel, because it can be dangerous in that kind of way.
Do you know, by the way, do you know what Professor Biener, we had him on the podcast early on, he was like talking about basically what a fascist, potentially like Nietzsche and Heidegger are. His latest project, you know what it's about?
No, what?
It's about Moses.
Oh, yeah.
And about like what an authoritarian fascist he is, basically. It's really good.
I don't know if
I hear that Hammurabi was quite a tyrant.
Well, just well, it's really like the inconsistencies. He presented a paper in our department recently about like how like the inconsistencies in the Bible and like how like there's a lot of like absurd stuff about that does like lead to a lot of us, and basically questioning people who give like a really kind of like egalitarian spin on the Bible, on like the Old Testament,
yeah,
and he's kind of like responding to
just like on a much more pedantic point, this is what also fucking irritates me when he's like, oh, the university is fucking filled with these postmodern neo-Marxists and nobody even knows these things anymore. I'm like, really? Have you actually been in any political science department? Like, you will go through this to the threshold where you want to fucking slit your throat. Like, there's so much stuff about the Bible, the Christian tradition. You'll film through like all of St. Augustine's writings.
It's so funny that, and like even in the very university that he used to work at for a long time, and like literally 3 floors down or 2 floors down where I am, the Department of Political Science, it's like he would have known that actually that especially that department had like a reputation for having a lot of like very traditional conservative thinkers.
Yeah, or Victoria College, right? I mean, it's literally like a
Northrop
Christian
Frye's college. Yeah, like it's
like,
the home of structuralists.
I am the only postmodern neo-Marxist that I know of.
There you go.
And I have to be friends with you guys because that's what I'm. That's the pickings are slim.
Do you think Eric is a postmodern neo-Marxist too?
No. Postmodern neo-Persian, maybe?
No, he's like a pragmatist.
Yeah, he's kind of a pragmatist.
I think Eric is too weird. Eric is like the embodiment of like Kierkegaard's thing. Like, if you label me, you negate me. Like, there's no way to.
I think I'm literally the only postmodern neo-Marxist at this table.
Somehow you got stuck with these libs. I don't know if.
Easily. Yeah. Literary historian. Let's leave it at that.
All right, we have 2 clips left. We have Peterson cries over music is chaos.
Let's do that one.
And then we have trans people are an exotic species.
Let's save that one for
all right.
Over there, right? The totalitarianism versus innovation versus giving people the freedom and also removing the fear.
All right, this clip is actually too long, so I'm not going to play the whole thing. I'll play the end because the whole beginning of it is like, well, the Chinese are over there and they're an authoritarian, but they're producing so many ideas and they're producing so many engineers, blah, blah, blah. And then Joe Rogan answers, but they're authoritarian, so they're not creative. And Jordan Peterson goes, of course, well, they're not as creative as Americans, but they're also creative, blah, blah, blah. And then we get into music. And they talk about Jimi Hendrix a bit. Respect.
Yeah, I am. Respect Hendrix.
Okay. This is his philosophy of music, which he came up with a few weeks ago.
This week, yeah.
So music is just like the world because the world's made of patterns. And then music
Everything is music.
has layered patterns.
Everything is climate.
It's like
together in
Bjork.
harmonious
Everything
manner.
is music. When I go
And so
home,
what
I
you
throw
do when you
pots
hear
and
that,
pans
especially if it's got a
Sorry.
beat, well, then you move your body, and you want to, right? The music calls to you to move your body.
Did I ever
So
tell
now
you
you're
one of my
moving
great
your
Not right
body
now.
in sync with the patterned layers of the world. That's meaning.
I can't
And then
believe
there's more
Peterson
to it. That's
invented
so cool,
dancing.
is music is an analog of the structure of existence itself.
Wow.
And it calls to
Deep.
you to take part in that.
Deep.
And then, so maybe you dance by yourself, or maybe even better, you dance with someone else. And so then you both bring your bodies into this patterned relationship with this multi-layer harmony together in a spontaneous way, indicating that you can both play and are therefore potentially trustworthy future mates. That's unbelievably
Oh,
cool.
dance
Birds
is for
dance,
mates.
not just human
Birds.
beings.
Of course,
Oh,
it's got an
God.
evolutionary
Oh,
purpose.
God.
Thanks,
It's got an evolutionary
Grandpa.
purpose. It's got an evolutionary purpose,
Puts
of
you
course.
on the border between chaos and order, because a boring song does exactly what you expect it to do and gets dull very quickly. And an unlistenable song is so random you can't follow it. And so what you want is predictability with a leaven of unpredictability. And then that puts you right on the edge. That's the zone of proximal
I don't disagree with that.
Vygotsky.
I do not disagree with this,
Hendrix.
but this is
Yeah.
the
Like-
stupidest smart person insight that you could possibly imagine.
you know what I-
music borders structure and creativity at the same time.
But you
It
know,
sounds
you
to
know,
me like
but-
he wants Latin music though, like reggaeton. I think would blow his mind.
But you know what's important about like noting when we don't disagree though is because like I think those moments when we're like, oh yeah, like that makes sense, because it helps us understand and explain why like so many people
It's
like,
the
get
it's the
entranced.
gateway drug to the rest of his bullshit. Yeah.
It's because like so it's worth pointing out and being like, well, yeah, like that's he's right.
I mean,
there.
it's
And, like,
very
that's-
true. That is what music is.
Yeah, exactly.
That everybody knows who knows anything at all knows.
I mean,
that's
we're
what
all.
music
I
is.
mean, everyone at this table, we're a bunch of snobby ass fucking elite PhDs,
And we're
it's like,
jealous
Well, you
of
know,
his success. We're jealous of
the
his
appeal
fame.
of a rave is that it strips music down to its most primal elements. So when you really get in there and you take your shirt off, you know, it's just like,
Oh, he talks about punk music
I
here. and he's
remember.
like,
are you talking about yourself
no,
right now?
not
Ludwig?
Lobster Daddy, of course.
I have a distinct memory in my mind right
Oh yeah.
I mean, you say that, Victor. I saw you at my wedding.
He goes
So-
in here into punk music and how punks are nihilists, but they
Really?
bump into each other, and when they feel each other bumping into each other, then they can forget their own nihilism for a second, and that's why there's punk music.
And this grinding, God, it's like the bees, you know, they got to attract the mates.
All right, we got quick two.
Wait. I just want to, as a punk fan, I want to say that irritates me because I would take the exact opposite aesthetic approach to punk. If anything, punk is the opposite of nihilism. Punk sees significance everywhere. The problem is the world is filled with injustice, and yet there are so many good people within it that the only possible thing that we can do is get angry and try to change it. If anything, punk invests us in a huge mission for complete social transformation in the name of some ideal of justice that's usually signified through anger.
And you know, in the mosh pit, if someone falls down, you pick them up. That's punk music. Anyway.
That's real.
Also smoke a lot of cigarettes and drink a lot of beer. But I mean, you know,
We got 2 minutes left on this one, and it's going to end well, I promise you.
Okay, let's go.
fuck him if he dishes punk. Not cool, man.
Behave yourself.
Much creativity inside the structure of the song because there's riffs that he'll do.
Right. And everyone loves, oh man, I went to this bar in Nashville. This band was playing Kelly's Heroes, a great guitarist, the best guitarist I've ever seen.
Great music
And
city
they were
for our
playing
Have you
Nashville
heard of
fans.
that?
with
Kelly's
heavy
Heroes?
blues,
Is that
rock,
Nashville has a
rock,
great
twist.
music scene.
But is it well known?
I've heard Nashville.
Pause it for a second.
Ghost Riders in the Sky, like 15 minutes long.
Okay, so the Nashville, I remember, I didn't know like anything about who he was seeing, but I remember him tweeting when he was in Nashville because he tweeted like he's been obsessed with the lockdowns. That hasn't come up in any of the clips.
Oh,
we've been
I know what you're
listening to.
talking. Yeah.
And he actually tweeted like a photo of Nashville, like when we were at the beginning of Omicron, like when it was crazy. And he said something like, he was like, no lockdowns here. And he literally said, God bless the rednecks.
Oh.
And it was like in Nashville, Tennessee.
I'd also like to point out that at that point, Tennessee had the fourth highest rates of COVID infection in the entire union. There were more cases of COVID in Tennessee than there were in the whole of Canada.
Yeah, there
I
you
have
go.
to say God bless the rednecks also, because
I agree.
they prevent government overreach. I will say, dialectically, they prevent it because, you know, if a vaccine
actually-
causes this much problems, then they're not going to do anything worse to us.
Yeah, that's.
All right, we got to get to 1 minute 39 seconds.
I want to listen to it. I want to hear it. I'm not bored.
He starts feeling himself.
And this brilliant guitarist just goes way out on a limb, and everybody in the crowd, it was so fun to be there. They're just thrilled to death because they're watching this man doing the same thing that surfers do. He's like dancing on the edge of chaos and order in this virtuosic manner, and everyone is so taken by that it just lifts them out of the normality of their existence. You see this joy just transfuse them, and that's because they got an intimation of genuine meaning. And it's not amenable to rational criticism, which is the thing that I thought that struck me as so miraculous about music, and why it has this element of salvation. It's like it puts you directly in touch with the meaning that sustains you in life directly, and it shows you what that would be, which is something like to observe the harmonious interplay of the patterns of being stacked on top of one another, and then to bring yourself into alignment with that, which is what yogis strive to do and what disciplined
To be
athletes
fair, I
strive
do
to do.
like music a
What we
lot.
And after
celebrate
2
in
years
Africa-
ago, we all miss live music. We're not going to laugh at
Again,
this.
like I don't think he's not like wrong.
No,
like,
yeah.
it's just
Yeah.
Like, I'd be lying if I didn't say
No.
I didn't cry at music.
The
at
wrong
various
was
points.
the significance of music is being on the boundary of chaos and order, which is where he's trying to like shoehorn his theory in.
well. It
But
also
I don't even care the fact that he's just like crying about this. I care about his crying about this given the whole frame of context that this conversation is in.
I think we're assholes for laughing at him crying, but I think
There's
also
a few things I won't laugh at him for. Getting addicted to drugs, his wife getting cancer. I accept those as reasons to cry.
real tragedies.
But
yeah.
then his realization about music at the age of 56 is that there's both innovation and structure in music, and that's going to make him
He's just
cry on a
regretting that he
podcast.
didn't go to more tragically hip concerts. That's the real revelation.
Well, I think, but it speaks to something that I've talked about several times on this podcast, which is just the way that Peterson just sees the world in such a solemn way, in such a deadly serious way. He just like sees the world with this level of profundity that there's just like no room for like humor and absurdity. Like it's like everything is like, because he's on the edge of tears all the time. And I feel like the problem with him is like, we actually, Matt and I, we were talking to our buddy Isocratic, small YouTuber, and like we were talking about Zizek and like kind of comparing Zizek to Peterson. And like I think it's interesting because they're both informed by psychoanalysis, just in very different ways. And I think what's interesting about it is that like you see the way that like for Peterson, the profundity of the world is like overwhelming, with like tears are ready to overflow at like any second. And it's like Zizek is just like, he responds to like the overflowing meaning of the world and with just like the absurdity. It's like we're all
irony,
jokes. It's like, look at us. We're these like creatures that are like stuck in this crazy dialectic of desire, and it's like hilarious, and it's like he's laughing at it. But like Peterson doesn't know how to laugh at anything. And I think like the problem with Peterson ultimately is he like doesn't have enough introspection to realize that like a lot of the profundity he's experiencing might be particular to like him, like shit that happened to him when he was young. Like I don't know what his background is. He has like no self-reflexivity, and he's projecting the like profundity of the world onto everybody else and like sees it as an objective truth.
But his profundity is this: like, if he does not say this to these people at this time, the world is about to slide off into chaos. So the stakes for him are very high. And
That's true.
Honestly, there's no point in making fun of him for crying, but it's just so funny that this is the thing, that he's a jazz or a country bar in Nashville is the thing that is going to bring him to tears. Despite like you'd think that there'd be certain levels of empathy that are involved with that he just doesn't demonstrate at all, because he talks about me, the postmodern neo-Marxist, as this person who has no friends, who hates everybody.
You are a pretty humorless person. We all know that, right? You just sit
I don't
there
think he's
and you're-
humorless.
I was fucking being sarcastic.
That's a great contrast, Berzunia.
Yeah,
There's things. I mean, there's plenty of things to condemn pills for. Like we could find, but like
I didn't know about that. I mean, I want one of those hats, so I'm sometimes envious and resentful of the fact that he has one and I don't. But I can.
And I think you can explain that further, by the way, the Zizek Peterson thing, by the fact that look at the societies in which they grew up, right? Like Zizek actually struggled with real adversity and stuff. He actually was canceled or whatever. Like he had to actually fight against the real totalitarian system.
I never thought about that.
He knows how to laugh about the world, whereas Peterson has had it too good. He's had like this cushy tenure track job, and like he sees these imagined villains.
He grew up in like in rural Alberta.
This is what happens when you actually grow up in a pretty like legit country, which is now coming to terms with more forms of equality and everything. And it's like, oh, it's. You're
right. You're actually right. That a lot of Zizek's humor is humor he talks about from like the like Soviet era and like the socialist era. And, like,
and he's much more acclimated to crisis and everything like that.
I never thought of.
Whereas like, and that's the difference. He has a much healthier approach to like the ambiguities of life and everything than Peterson.
I will say though, I do think that I can understand his appeal in part because of these reactions, and I think one of the reasons is, and Zizek points this out, inhabiting a postmodern environment, the primary form of cultural expression is almost always irony and dissociation from one's feelings, or meta-level commentary on how it is that you're feeling things. I think that I can understand the appeal of somebody who has a kind of immediacy about them and seems willing to embrace and even project his kinds of feelings about any given situation. What I think is really problematic is exactly what Victor was talking about, the fact that he invests his feelings with such overwhelming significance always. And
in an objective sense.
He's always like a Dostoevsky character on the edge of an epiphany. It's just like it's all emotion and
The thing is, it works. He's talking to the same people that grew up probably in the same suburbs of fucking Edmonton that he grew up.
I can vaguely see the kind of appeal, right? Because growing up in a Seinfeld or Simpsons era, but actually I shouldn't say Simpsons because Simpsons had some nice cathartic moments, but say a Seinfeld era, right? There is something that's appealing about somebody who just acknowledges how they feel and expresses it. Right? Think about David Foster Wallace from the 1990s. It's a similar kind of figure from when Peterson's growing up. But like somebody who will open their book, Maps of Meaning, with a quote from the Psalm saying, "I will utter truths that the world has never yet known." You just have to sit there and think like this isn't even sincerity or authenticity anymore. This is grandiosity, arrogance, and not a little bit of like hamminess. Like it's really kind of hammy at this point where you just think like, fucking chill out, dude. Take it down like 4 or 5 levels. I understand that listening to Freebird is a wonderful experience. I like Skinner like anybody else, but like it's not at the level of significance that you're.
But to that point as well, like it's perfectly valid to be like that sincere about the world and everything like that. Okay, like look in Terrence Malick's films, for example, but you don't have to be such a smart narky curmudgeon about it, like our friends.
Well, also,
so,
but I also think like again, we have to like acknowledge the conditions of why he's so popular, right? And so I think like
it means he's right about something.
Well, it's not, but it's not just that. It also tells us something about like an appetite.
Yeah, totally.
In the public, right? Like so, like that's important. I think to acknowledge that like something is not being satiated by like the fact that he found this giant gap. That it's like the intelligentsia, that like us, like that we just have been doing a shit job of like providing, right? It's like he's exposed that in a way because it's like there is an appetite for like intellectualized thinking. I mean, we can make fun of and poke holes and like it's worth making fun of, but it's like, but the truth is like he is exposing like something that there is a public that wants something that's hungry for like some account of what meaning is.
And I think that's true.
And
even
we're not doing a good job of providing it, right? So like which is like if we were, he wouldn't be filling that gap.
And also this is the reason that we're doing a podcast on this. It's partially our own jouissance. We're jealous of the guy. We're jealous that he has the success. We're jealous that he has the audience. Because we feel like...
Not me, I don't need that many fucking bullshit followers.
We put the work in and he's just saying whatever the fuck, like he farts out of his ass. And I mean, that's part of it. That's part of why intellectuals hate him. It's also why intellectuals hate Zizek, because it feels like, oh, they're getting it too easy. So I mean, we should just straight up admit that.
Hey,
we'll admit that. We're jealous that he's that successful. But we're also saying that he's wrong.
But it was also the perfect storm, of course, because he threw himself against like the Ontario Human Rights Court or whatever. Like back, that's why he caught on fire. People were interested in him because of that.
Right,
he was like the original political bad boy contrarian. Yeah. And then they started listening to like his stuff about the Bible or whatever. But he kind of stumbled into it.
You're right.
Way.
He said, you're right. He what he did was he caught on to like a phenomenon, like some woke thing, or like something that
The
like a lot
culture
of
war.
He establishes
culture-
anti-woke credentials.
Culture war
Yeah.
stuff that like most academics are like, you know, either just like aren't interested or, well, you know, to be less generous, just cowards to talk about. So like, and he just like leaned right into it. And there's a lot of like non-academic people, regular people who are like, oh wow, like yeah, that thing that I heard on the news about like whatever, it's like it never made sense to me, and now like there's someone with authority saying like it's bullshit. And it's like, and he's just like riding that wave, right?
Why don't we use this to transition?
Very, I see what you
I
did
just
there.
want to say one last thing, which is that I completely agree with everything that Brazzoni is saying, and I think it is something that we could do a better job on when it comes to the left, because I think one of the things that really speaks to his appeal is the fact that A, he is sincere, and B, he does seem to have a real concrete political project that he invests with extraordinary significance.
It's not concrete though, is it?
Well, it's concrete in the sense that people invest it with a certain level of
Yeah,
significance
I
and
see.
gravity.
It's
That's
like
what I mean.
restore Western civilization.
And I can understand the yearning for a project of that sort. I just think this is entirely the wrong project. And in fact, the fact that he transforms these extremely petty struggles into something of existential significance is, again, really quite funny. And he's not the first conservative to do that, by the way. But, you know, we could on the left try to do a little bit more to actually say that, look, like, there are reasons to not be cynical and dissociative and meta about things. Maybe we can actually just say that this is what we really want and this is what we care about, which is also something Zizek points out a lot, right? Where he says, if you want to be a good left-wing movement, maybe stop trying to be so clever about things and just say, this is what we want, right? This is what we demand.
You know what's interesting too about Peterson when in contrast to Zizek is I think Peterson, what he also offers, you know, this is like maybe the more philosopher king take, like, or the kind of like superiority intellectual take. Well, he's offering like comforting truths,
Yeah,
to
definitely.
the public, and I think Zizek doesn't really offer the same kind of comforting truths. If anything, he is like kind of delegitimizing and kind of like you know, like kind of being like pissing on sacred cows.
Yeah.
But you got to chop the
Right,
balls
and-
of people
and,
in power, right?
And ultimately, I think what Peterson's project is, which is like what gives a lot of people some comfort, is he's trying to re-sanctify things and make things sacred again, in a way.
All right. Well, we've given his due to his due. Now we're going to transition to the greatest hits that made Jordan Peterson famous. So trigger warning. He's walking back his hate speech, I guess, and decided that trans people are just an entirely different species from the rest of us. So here we go.
Mhm.
You can't joke
Sacred
about
things.
Yeah, there's protected classes now. We all know who they are. We don't even have to bring them up. You know, whether it's trans people, gay people, people of color, Asian people, whatever those things are. One thing you can mock relentlessly is white people, specifically white males. It's one of the.
Well, they are pretty funny, you know.
Oh, sure, we're ridiculous, but it's a funny pejorative that people will say about like a group of folks. They're primarily white males. Like that's a pejorative. Like that's like
It's my audience. That's
Yeah,
what everyone
that's-
says.
yeah.
Oh, you're talking to those young, angry young white males.
But isn't that funny? That is
Hilarious.
that means something negative. Does that make any
Women
sense?
are more interested in fiction than nonfiction, and men are opposite to that. So if you look at book buying preferences, for example, women tilt towards fiction and men tilt towards nonfiction. And if you want to know why that is, it's because the most reliable difference that psychologists have ever found between men and women, the biggest difference, is interest. So women are reliably more interested in people and men are reliably more interested in things. Now, there's still overlap. It's one standard deviation, which is a big difference. But that isn't to say no women are interested in things, because some are, and no men are interested in people, because some are. Like, I'm a man who's more interested in people than things. That's why I'm a psychologist. You know, I actually have a relatively feminine personality structure because I'm pretty high in negative emotion and I'm pretty high in agreeableness. And that's the typical feminine structure. And that's an interesting discussion to have too, because, you know, we have this idea in our culture that you can be a woman born in a man's body. And that's not true. But you can definitely be a man with a feminine personality structure. Like 10% of men are as feminine in their personality as the average woman is. And vice versa. 10% of women are as masculine in their personality as the average man is. Now, you can move those boundaries around and say, well, it's 5% and 40 or something. It doesn't matter. But the point is, there's plenty of men who are as feminine in their personality as the average woman. That doesn't mean they're in the wrong body. It just means that men and women are more alike than different, even though they are different, and that there's huge range within both genders. And we need to know this.
So what do you think is happening with trans people then?
What a question.
Rogan knows. The money shot.
What do you think is happening with trans people? Okay, let's paint them all with a brush. At the same time, Jordan Peterson, go. Trigger warning.
A lot of different kinds of trans people.
Okay,
First
trans
of all,
men, or excuse me, trans women, men to female.
well, then I would say it depends on what period of time you're asking that question about. Right now, if you look at teenagers, for example, who want to switch genders, 95% of them are unbearably confused. That's what's causing that. And I think there's other reasons too. I think this is a conjecture. When the trans teenagers came after me when I opposed Bill C-16 in Canada on compelled speech grounds, I spent quite a bit of time watching them. And I already kind of knew about that fluid identity crowd. When I was at Harvard, piercing
Those types.
and tattooing started to become a cultural rage. And I was interested in, well, who's doing this? Because I knew it was a practice that was limited to criminal subtypes and outcasts for a long time.
It's
So,
just
for example,
so
if you went to the
uncool.
circus, you're
To be
likely
fair to him,
tattooed.
he's talking about it at the time. But yeah.
You toured around the circus.
I mean, that's just so cringy, though.
It was an
Just
outsider
tell.
life. And if you were a prisoner, same thing. But then all of a sudden it started to make its inroads into the popular culture. So
What a
we
narc.
studied a group of early adopters of tattooing and piercing from the perspective of personality. Like, who are these people? And they were all highly creative people. Well, and creativity is a trait. And all people who aren't creative, that's wrong. In fact, most people aren't creative at all. And I can explain that later, but they're not. We developed a scale called the Creative Achievement Questionnaire, which assesses lifetime contribution to 13 different creative
Does it
domains.
take into account everything?
And that your scores would range from
Yeah,
zero.
this is where
I have no training or
everything
talent in
comes
this
into
area,
account.
to, I think it was 8.
No, just 8
I'm an
things.
international
Oh,
not
just
everything.
expert
Not
in this
Just 8
area.
things.
So what's the world value?
And so,
of it? Yeah.
70% of people, if you summed their scores across all 13 domains, scored 0. And I ask audiences, like, how many portraits have you painted? 0. How many songs have you composed? 0. How many plays have you written? 0. How many recipes have you invented?
Stop you. Let me stop you.
So
let
the
me stop.
tattooed types are high. They were high in creativity.
Okay.
And a lot of these people who are fluid in their identity are actually high in trait openness. And they do have fluid identities. And some of them are feminine men and masculine women. So, yeah, but that doesn't mean that surgery is the cure for that. It does not mean that.
Does not mean
what is-
that.
what
This is such a
Rogan
gross
curious.
overgeneralization as well, as if all trans women get surgery. But anyway, yeah.
Yeah.
It's
No,
awful.
it's disgusting all the way down, but it's like this is a specialized group of people. If we evaluate the group, then we can understand. So it almost sounds like he's trying to walk back other stuff that he said. And he's trying to say something like, well, trans people aren't all bad because they're the creative types.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
I mean,
It's definitely a bizarre take.
it's a strange.
He,
I mean, it's
he
a
knows
strange
this is his
take.
brand too, so he has to kind of like say something about it. But he can, yeah, it's
Yeah, it's interesting. I was thinking, like, there's this random YouTuber I was watching recently, and he has this like really weird take on like trans issues that is reminding me of what Peterson is saying, which is just like that he just thinks it's on the spectrum of like any sort of body modification. So he was talking about like tattoos and stuff like that.
Yeah,
and,
that's
like,
that's the gateway drug.
exactly it's just like any sort of like modification where you're trying to like escape from yourself is kind of like this theory. I don't agree with it, but I'm just saying, like, so it's like,
So when you cut your hair,
so it's like when you do, so yeah, exactly. So, but it's all, so for him, it's like all on the spectrum. So it's like, that's a smaller one, right? Like, and his thesis is like, none of us really want to be who we are. we're all like trying to escape to some extent. It's just some of us want to escape more.
So first
And
you
then
dye your
therefore-
hair,
Exactly.
then you get piercings, and then you become transgender.
He even thinks makeup is on that spectrum, but it's just like, and then it's just like that's.
Yeah.
well,
I mean, I'm not saying I agree, but I'm
Yeah,
saying
but
it
I
reminds me
think
of what Peterson is saying.
Marshall McLuhan had a really good quote about this where he said, look, to imagine a naked human being is the same as imagining a beetle without its shell, right? We are people who fundamentally transform ourselves. That's intrinsic to who it is that we are. And so to imagine that these kinds of transformations are artificial or strange is really just not to understand what it means to be human. Now, that doesn't mean you have to agree with every kind of weird thing that people do. But it does mean that you should at least appreciate that this kind of variety is going to be intrinsic to any kind of human society that you encounter.
Well, do you see the way that he's doing this? Because he's saying, in the same way that you would say, or I don't know, like a crystal gripping person would be like, well, the indigenous had such a pure understanding of nature, and until we came and ruined it. So like the self-affected person, he's giving trans people like, oh, you have this domain. You're not really people. You're just like overly creative. So you extend your creativity to your gender.
Does he really seem that you're not really people?
No, by saying you are a class like this.
Oh, right.
Like,
Okay.
They're the half elves in the D&D Peterson cosmology. It's
Is
like,
every transgender person you know creative, or are like a few of them just math nerds that are just nerds in every other category and not creative?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's
This
but,
this is bullshit because he's exoticizing trans people. Like I think he thinks in his head he's giving them a compliment coming back from the old shit that he said about them. That is like, I'm not going to use your preferred pronouns because that's discriminating my use of language.
So I will say that I have anecdotally noticed an overrepresentation of like queer in the broad category in like philosophy and like creative endeavors. And I've always thought of this like as kind of just like in my own sort of like folk psychological intuitions. I was like, well, it makes sense to me because like when you feel like you don't fit in to this world, you just have to think about the world more.
That would be
because you're like, well, what is this world that I don't fit into? So therefore you are just like going to be like thinking. And so it just seems intuitive to me that you would be more likely to be in philosophical or artistic fields because you're noticing things. When you fit in the world, when you fit in with the world, there's a lot of things you don't notice, right? Like, but when you don't fit into the world and you're trying to like, let's say become like trans, and I remember my girlfriend, she used to have a roommate who was a trans woman. And I remember hearing her kind of talk about like, make comments that like kind of spoke to the way she's like paying meticulous attention to like
you start
what
to notice
femininity looks like.
the glitches in
and
the
it's
matrix.
Like, and it's like, how am I
Yeah.
fitting into that femininity? Like in what ways? So it's like, you were just forced to pay attention in a way that like.
So he's saying something opposite. He's saying you're creative, and then that creativity extends into your gender. And you're saying, no, you start with like not
whatever.
fitting in, which is the thing that makes you creative.
Exactly right.
Yeah, and that's it. I think that's a good
more amenable to the second explanation than the first.
Yeah, especially because I would actually say that's more consonant with the general outlook, oddly enough, of Western civilization as a whole, right? I mean, you go back to something like Plato and Socrates. One of the catalysts for the philosophical enterprise is the fact that the philosopher doesn't feel like he or she belongs in the human community, which is one of the things that stimulates them to start to think this way, right? Like, why do I not belong? Why do people have these kind of projects? Why is it that people believe what they believe? So I actually think that, if anything, you're affirming a more ancient kind of wisdom than he is, right?
Anyway,
So well done. I just want to say, in sum, I'm a student of Brezonianism on this point. I think that the Brezonianist approach to understanding these issues is better than him.
Okay, well,
I mean, this is feeling kind of dark to me, so I'll give him another maybe minute, and then we'll wrap it up after that.
All right.
Well, what do you think it means when someone is so attracted to the idea that they were born in the wrong body? It means so much. They're so compelled that they're willing to go through surgery to change.
God, it means all sorts of things. I knew a kid in Toronto who was on the autistic spectrum, and a lot of the people who are manifesting serious issues with gender identity are on the autistic spectrum.
Okay,
Like
no, I
Abigail
can't do this
Schreier's
anymore.
book and
So,
background
first of
gender
all,
dysphoria amongst women.
trans people are overly creative, but now they're also autistic. So I think I'm done with this fucker.
I mean, that's strange. I mean, I wonder if there's actually stats to back that up. I mean, I'm trying to be charitable here.
No,
but I
he
don't
says
know.
he had a student in Toronto. I don't know. Anyway, he's returning to the hits. Now he's like trying to extend. I mean, maybe put his best foot forward and saying trans people are creative, but they're still an exotic species. If you
guys, mark my words. In like 5 years, he's gonna be the next Caitlyn Jenner. Like he's gonna come out as trans. He's just gonna be when he sees his popularity is just like ebbing.
No, he'll be Jordan, but with a Y and N.
Jordana, no,
Jordana.
whatever,
Yeah.
like,
What do you
yeah.
think? I'm
but
curious.
he
what
grew
you
up like the 90s. We had the same debates were happening about gay people. Like gay people are just confused. Now that just suddenly slips under the rug for these conservative.
No, but that does point to something though, which is the speed with which these changes have happened. Like gay marriage was being debated just like 10 years ago, and now that's like a fait accompli. Now it's like, okay, trans rights and everything. And there is something to be said about how quickly this has happened, especially in certain parts of North America, that people are like not necessarily uncomfortable with it, but they just don't have the vocabulary for it yet. And that's why he can kind of speak to that more confused crowd. Yeah.
Yeah, to be fair, like a lot of my more conservative friends and associates, that's exactly what they say. I mean, one of my intelligent conservative friends, I won't name him, basically said like 10 years ago I was asked to accept gay marriage, and I did. And now I'm being asked to accept this, and I'm just not sure what the next thing I'm going to be asked to accept is. It's all happening too fast. Now, I don't necessarily sympathize with that view in the sense of thinking it's intellectually cogent, but I do empathize it with the sense
You understand why there's a space for somebody like him then to then kind of like complain about it.
and I
Yeah.
understand why people might come in and question.
We got to go one at a time. But this is like Victor just said. This is why this guy has the wave behind him that he does. It's because like people go, trans people, like as if it's up to you to just make a decision, a medical decision in many cases about
Yeah.
someone else's life. But
Well, can I just
this
add-
guy voices those concerns.
Yeah, true. I mean, I just want to add like a kind of like to add on to Matt's point, sort of like about having empathy for like people. I think that like there is, a bit of a conservative reactionary potential in all of us. And I think like, and it's interesting that when I was studying urban planning, I did my master's in urban planning as like also, and I remember like one of the things that like, whether you're on the left or the right, we see this all the time is like people complain when things change.
Yeah.
So like when you're going to build a new building or something somewhere, it's like, or tearing something down, it's like, it doesn't matter if you're like lefty or like a right winger, like you're going to find people who are going to be like, I don't want that to change.
I mean,
And I'm
Facebook,
just saying like
it's-
that is like a part of human nature.
I mean, look
to
at
just
Facebook.
be
It's
like-
gone through so many generations, and every single time it goes through a new iteration, I get bombarded with people being like, "It was so good the way it was before.
Man,
why the fuck is it?"
When,
my-
when they
my-
put
my
fucking
own-
news feed on Facebook, that's when I canceled it.
My only point is just that like it's not that weird, like to for a conservative to be like, I accepted this thing. Like I think it's in a way that potential is in all of us.
Yeah, and I'd like to point out, like, conservatives are sometimes the more reflective and more intelligent conservatives usually acknowledge that there's a high degree of irrationalism in their position. Russell Kirk, author of Conservative Mind, which is, a positive book.
Well, he's an idiot though.
Yeah, I mean, he's a weird guy. But one of the things that he says that I think is right is that conservatism is first and foremost a disposition rather than a philosophy.
Wasn't that? Didn't you just steal that from what's his name? The
Evan Burke.
no, not well, Edmund Burke, I guess. But like I was thinking of the other guy, the 20th century conservative person.
Oh, Buckle Oakeshott. Yeah, I mean,
Guys, we're
Oakeshott,
way
Oakeshott.
at the end of the cast. It's not the time to start name dropping.
the point is that, like, there is this kind of conservative reaction that people do have. Like, I don't like when Facebook changes either. I sit there and I'm like, what the fuck? And when changes happen too rapidly, there's a part of me that thinks like, no, I like things the way they were before. Or even if I didn't like them, at least I had a set of expectations about how my life was going to go. And all of a sudden that's been upturned. So definitely I can empathize. I just don't sympathize because sometimes I think, well, there's no real reason for me to adopt this kind of attitude. So on second tier reflection, maybe it's better that things change. Maybe that means that it'll improve. Maybe it means that things will be better. Or actually, upon looking at the evidence, it seems like this will be better. And I don't think a lot of conservatives typically do that, or many of them don't.
That's true.
At least
That's true.
they kind of settle into the reaction, and that's where they stay.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, and this is sadly why like a culture war profiteer, if you will, like Peterson can kind of like get away with his shtick for so long. It's because, especially in a country like the US, where like you know, you have to have sort of like universalize things quite quickly, where if something is happening in San Francisco or New York, it does kind of spread to the rest of the states pretty quickly, even if culturally maybe they're not really at the same, you know, they're not ready to accept the same kind of things. It's because it's all like, it's this loose coalition or federation of states ultimately that, you know, the same things kind of all happen in the same way. But yeah, it's the problem is with the political system as much as anything else.
I should point out the weird thing is academics, oddly enough, despite being broadly speaking culturally left, are some of the most personally conservative people I know. Like most academics are like, I like my coffee like this, I like my books laid out like this, I like my computer like this.
Creatures of habit, yeah.
And
Creatures of actually, my girlfriend's like, she has these, like, I always kind of make fun of her because she likes like traditions, and I always just tell her, I'm like, when she, like something comes up, she's like, we did it before, and I'm like, that's how we always done it. That's how we're always gonna do it. And it's like, this is like this thing that I think exists in people, that it's just like they just want to keep doing things the way that they are.
Yeah, it's not because it's the best way. It's just because it's like, well, this is what I've done.
This is not a great way to wrap this up, because we were having so much fun, and now I'm just feeling like.
Really? Oh well, I mean, I don't know. I think it's just a point about human nature. The fact that like we all have some conservative.
There's no such thing as human nature, Victor.
I mean, I don't know.
That's the postmodern neo-Marxism, and I'm seeking.
I mean, there is such thing as human tendencies.
We can all agree we enjoy nachos.
There's such thing as habit.
I think part of the problem also is Victor is speaking in his really solemn voice, like, well, but there is this kind of thing.
I feel
and when
it
Victor speaks
because my
in a solemn
girlfriend
voice,
said it.
When Bozzoni speaks in a solemn voice, I'm like, yeah.
When his girlfriend said it, you know it has to.
No,
be
but
true.
I mean, I don't even agree. I don't have the same tendency that she.
This
does.
is why I
Can we
converted to
just go
Bozzonism
back?
so quickly.
Can we just quickly end on Jordan Peterson crying about a song that he heard in Nashville?
Normality of their existence, you see this joy just transfuse them, and that's because they got an intimation of genuine meaning, and it's not amenable to rational criticism, which is the thing that I thought that struck me as so miraculous about music, and why it has this element of salvation. It's like
element of salvation. All right. To all of our listeners, to everyone who is watching this cast,
praise be to Jesus.
Please listen to whatever song brings you to tears in the same way that Jordan Peterson
praise
does.
Be.
And I mean, at least for my part, I'm going to attempt to no longer bring him up, because I think it's been brought up. I think Western civilization has been defended as much as it will be defended.
Yeah. And they're never going to make another Friday the 13th movie. Jason's dead forever. Come on.
I mean, I don't think we can get away from him forever, but thanks for hanging out with us.
It's the first time I've ever really been drunk on the podcast. So,
yeah, the booze are flowing. Thank you to Lit Vic, Politics Vic, Matt's keeping his dead soldiers next to him.
Santé.
And shout out to Nashville, which is a great music city, guys.
Yeah,
Nashville.
We never
don't
meant
get
to
the wrong
disparage you.
idea. Yeah.
Also, I want to point out Jimi Hendrix and Skinner, big fan.
Kind of fuck this guy, but you know what? He's like he's not the devil by any means.
And he's not like
he's
wrong
just
on
kind of
everything.
Stupid.
He's just, I mean, he thinks he's a lot smarter than he is, because he has like we talked about it. I mean,
can I just say?
So we will wait. Do you have something before we sign off?
Oh yeah, just having read a lot of conservative people, that's 99%.
Okay, we have nothing to.
No, I want to know if you're saying.
I'm sorry.
Your fucking Pills is such an asshole.
No, it's just.
No, I heard the speech coming up because he inhaled.
No,
It's not a speech.
He inhaled before he was.
Having read a lot of these people, a lot of them are like that, where there's kernels of insight, usually kernels of literary insight. That's one of the interesting things.
What about the guy who wrote American Marxism?
No, I mean, that's just a piece of shit. That deserves to be burned, irradiated, and then sent to the moon, and then the moon should be blown up afterwards.
Okay, sorry.
And then we should ban it.
Sorry, I didn't mean to put you on a rant.
No, but I mean, like, every now and then there's a couple of insights that they have in there, but like, what you need to do, and you should be better than most conservative intellectuals are, because they rest with their inclinations and associate so much profundity with them, and they never bother to move on to the second stage, which is asking whether these inclinations are actually rational or defensible. And everyone who listens to our podcast should be better than that.
Well, why don't we finish on a toast? A cheers to thank you to like dumb conservatives, or like at least questionable marginal conservatives.
Cheers.
For existing, because they give us something to laugh and talk about. So I'll drink to that.
So, yeah.
But we can't laugh also because we're postmodern neo-Marxists.
Well, I mean, I'm not a fucking postmodern.
You had to go to the American Marxism point. You just know how that book triggers me.
All right,
Triggers the
everybody,
shit.
this has been the Pill Pod 69, a number which has no significance whatsoever. Goodbye and good night.
Peace.
Peace.
I mean, I thought that was fun.
That was fun, yeah.
I thoroughly enjoyed it.